Source is a podcast made by women for women, and we are looking at the topics that are influencing women and the world they live in, and we're shedding light on those topics. We're speaking to the national experts and bringing you the stories that you're only going to hear here. Don't miss out on being in the know. Subscribe to Soul Source wherever you listen to podcasts today and leave us a review. This part is really, really important. That way we can continue to bring you the content you love each and every week.
You know, I always tell people this is not about you, that everybody loses when bright people play small.
Hello, I am Raquel Lamel, your host here of Soul Source, and we all have heard the term fake it until you make it. It's a common phrase said when you're in an uncomfortable situation, you're unsure of yourself and your skill set, but if you look like you know what you're doing, people will think that you do. The problem with that is that it can sometimes lead to something called imposter syndrome, which is traditionally defined as feelings of inadequacy that persist despite success. You know, like when you're considered to be an expert on a topic, but you downplay your successes or attribute it to luck instead of owning it. Well, you're here for a reason. If people believe you're an expert, well, it's because you are. And you've done the work, you've proven yourself, and now you're being recognized. Yet so many people, especially women, continue to feel like they need to overcompensate or downplay achievements and that they're not worthy of a seat at the table. This causes women to miss out on getting raises, promotions, and just getting a chance to be on the same level as the guys. Ladies, this is sad, and frankly, it needs to stop. So I've brought in the utmost international expert on imposter syndrome. I mean, she runs a website, and it's called impostersyndrome.com. She's a national speaker on the topic. She's spoken at organizations like Microsoft, NASA, Google, Facebook, Stanford, and Oxford universities. Her programs and career tips have been seen on NBC News, BBC Radio, or featured in Time Magazine, Newsweek, Cosmopolitan, Redbook, Women's Day, and Inc. Magazine, and a whole slew of other publications. And she's also an author of an award-winning book, The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, Why Capable People Suffer from the Imposter Syndrome and How to Thrive in Spite of It. Dr. Valerie Young is here. She's joining us from Western Massachusetts. Dr. Valerie Young, thank you so much. I can't express how excited I am to have you here on Soul Source today.
Really excited to be here.
We're excited to have you, and we're talking about imposter syndrome, and there's nobody who's more of an expert on this than you. Can you start off by just defining what that is for us, in your opinion?
Sure, absolutely. Actually, the more accurate term is the imposter phenomenon, but nobody except for in academia uses that. And the reason I mention that is it's not really a medically or psychologically diagnosable syndrome, but somewhere along the line it got called that over the years. But basically it describes this experience whereby people, despite evidence to the contrary, of our prior experience or our abilities, feel like we've somehow slipped through the system, flown under the radar, and that we're going to be found out, and that we're not really indeed as intelligent, capable, competent, talented as other people seem to think that we are. So there's this kind of difficulty internalizing our accomplishments, but we're very, very aware of our shortcomings and failures and so on.
I can definitely say I have experienced that. I'm sure it's pretty common. Is it common? Is it something you see often?
It's very common. You know, the percentage that's always thrown around is 70% of people. And that was something that came out. Pauline Clance, who's one of the two psychologists who first coined the term the imposter phenomenon. She and Gail Matthews did some research, decades ago, and their number is 70%. And that's what's kind of stuck out there. But it really depends on the field or the survey. In 2017, there was a study in the UK that found that 80% of CEOs and 81% of managing directors said they sometimes feel out of their depth and that they're struggling in their role. Research with medical students, it might be like 50% of the women feel it and about a quarter of the men feel it. So just different groups, different studies, but a lot of people, it's very common. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Is there a type of person who's more susceptible to experiencing imposter syndrome, or the phenomenon, as you called it?
Well, I don't know so much about a type of person as much as there are, what I consider to be perfectly good reasons why someone might feel like a fraud. For example, if you were raised by humans, you have a far greater chance of having imposter feelings than if you were not raised by humans, right? Because being human, even very well-intentioned parents can pass along some expectations or messaging that might lead a child to grow up and have imposter feelings. That said, we weren't all raised by the same parent. We didn't all get the same messages. And I'm not a big fan of, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. So it's a factor, but there are situational factors. Students as a group, college students, and the higher up you go into an advanced degree, they're more susceptible than other populations. People who work alone. And here we are, so many more people working alone right now. So it's really
Absolutely.
exacerbated. Whenever you're on the, kind of sense of belonging fosters confidence. So the fewer people who look or maybe sound like you, the more confident you feel, and the opposite can be true. So we know people who are first generation in their family to go to college or to have a white collar professional job are more likely to feel like imposters. If you're living or studying internationally, working internationally, you're more susceptible. Certainly women, people of color, folks with disabilities, whenever you're on the receiving end of stereotypes about competence or intelligence, you're going to be more vulnerable. And there's certain organizational cultures that fuel self-doubt, as well as fields. There's more people, for example, you're going to find more people in creative fields, writing, art, acting, and also in STEM fields for different reasons. So there's a lot of reasons that are situational, organizational, social, why people might feel like an imposter.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. I have to ask, you have this resume, you're an expert in this, and then do you ever experience imposter syndrome yourself? Have you ever dealt with this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the reason I actually changed my whole topic of my dissertation when I heard about this thing called the imposter phenomenon. I just immediately felt like, oh my God, that's me. And I wanted to understand it more. And at the time, they thought it was something that uniquely impacted women. The first study was called the Imposter Phenomenon amongst high achieving women. And so I looked at women's self-limiting attitudes and behaviors that might lead to imposter feelings. So it definitely felt like an imposter in graduate school. And many occasions over the years. I think the difference now is that I have kind of the insight and the tools to talk myself down faster when I have what I consider to be a really normal imposter moment.
So what are some of those tools? How do you cope?
It's about, first of all, my expectation is not for myself or for other people to never feel like an imposter again. To me, the goal is to talk yourself down faster. So folks who are waiting to never feel this way again, good luck. Because if you do understand, again, the perfectly good reasons why you might feel like a fraud, then you can kind of, when you have an imposter moment, you can kind of hit the pause button and kind of look around. Like this morning, I was on a call with somebody, representing this Women in Science organization. And she's getting a PhD in the sciences from Harvard.
Wow.
I said, how do you not feel like an imposter? You're going to this Ivy League school, elite, you're a PhD student. So the higher up you go, the more you just feel like you're fooling more people on a higher level. You're in science and you're a woman. So I want her to normalize it. I think that's the key is just, and the reason that is useful, Raquel, is that I think it's over psychologized. And what I'm trying to get people to do is to do less psychologizing and therefore less personalizing and more contextualizing.
Okay, that makes sense. Make it more like layman's terms, almost like the way you can think about it.
Yeah. Like, how do you not? Michelle Obama talked about her imposter syndrome 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the internet went crazy. Oh my God, how could Michelle Obama have imposter syndrome? Well, I wrote a blog post called Unpacking Michelle Obama's Imposter Syndrome that basically said, not how could she have imposter syndrome, but how could she not? Mm-hmm. Because in addition to grew up working class, had teachers who told her, or actually a guidance counselor who told her she wasn't Princeton material, multiple degrees. So she's highly educated. She had a really good connection because she married a guy who ended up being the president, right? So sometimes you go, well, it's only because I had a connection. But also, I think most importantly, she's got this pressure to represent her entire group. So all of those combined, it's like, of course you're going to feel like an imposter. How could you not?
Mm-hmm. So how, you said you did some of the research, but how did you go from feeling like an imposter, suffering from imposter syndrome, to now helping others and being such an expert on it? That's a pretty big shift.
Well, I'm a 30-year overnight success.
That's not overnight.
Exactly. I didn't set out to be an expert on imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
I took what I learned from my dissertation. I'm an educator. My background, my training is in education for adults. I put together a workshop to help people to look at their pattern. How does this manifest in their life? Look at the sources, look at the, what do we do about it? And having done that for, hundreds of thousands of people at this point, that started giving me additional information. But I also spent 7 years in the middle of that in a Fortune 200 company in corporate training and corporate marketing. I also, in the middle of it, for 25 years, I had a business called changingcourse.com, which helped people figure out how to make a living without a job. So, I've been doing a lot of different things. But so it wasn't like I set out to say, this is what I want to be an expert in. I think what's probably unique is a lot of people who talk about this subject, they're either like executive coaches or life coaches, or they're psychologists. And I think it's a really good thing that I'm not a psychologist, because I do come at it from a somewhat different perspective. And I've had the experience of being a graduate student. I've had the experience of working in a corporate world, and I've had the experience of being an entrepreneur. So I understand a lot of different worlds.
For sure. And you're able to come at it, like you said, that different perspective, that more just common perspective, I think, that everybody else is coming at it from. So why do people, it seems to be more women. I mean, you made a stat earlier too. You said 50% women, 25% men in a study that you had. So why does it seem that women suffer from this more? What are we doing?
Yeah, I think a few reasons. I think it's a combination of internal and external. The reality is women have more roles to judge themselves by, and where society is judging us by. Not only do we have to, feel like we have to excel in our career, but we got to look good. The house has to be perfect, the kids, perfect parents, and so on. I said, I had an electrician over recently, and I said, John, when you go to a man's house, do men apologize when the house is a mess? He said, never. But I often do that. So I think we've got more roles. So we got more places to feel like we're inadequate in, where there's those kind of social expectations. I also think we just don't have that kind of history of belonging. I mean, if you're really looking, broadly at history in many arenas. So we're kind of playing catch up. And then there is that, especially if you're the first one or one of the few or the only, there is, always going to be that kind of pressure to represent. I also think women as a group, and I'm generalizing because there are always exceptions, and there are a lot of men who painfully experience imposter feelings. But I think for women as a group, we are more crushed by even constructive criticism. I think we let it mean more about who we are as a person. So if someone says that report was inadequate, what we hear is, I'm inadequate.
Yeah, you were inadequate, and it's so hard. So what can you do to make yourself feel maybe less like an imposter then? Especially if you're in that environment that is just not your element, if you're the first.
Yeah, I mean, the first always has it the toughest. Sandra Day O'Connor said, if she hadn't done a good job, it would have made it harder for all other women coming after her. So it's just, the reality of the situation that you're taking on. But I think the key is to understand that there's a difference between, let me back up. There's a study that found that in a leaderless group, people are more willing to follow the more confident person over the more competent person.
Okay.
Right. So this person sounds like they know what they're talking about. They're very confident, even though they might not. This person really is competent. Let's go with the confident person. And I say that because I think we conflate competence and confidence. We see people who are confident and we assume, therefore, they must be competent. And I think women, especially, we're running around trying to get more and more competent, more credentialed, more experienced. When I think what a lot of us need to focus on is learning to both feel more confident and project more confidence. And I mention that because people who don't feel like imposters, people who are humble, but they've just never had these feelings, they're no more intelligent than we are. They're no more capable, competent, talented. It's just in the exact same situation where we might have an imposter response, like giving a presentation or at a meeting with people who are many levels above us, or taking on a new job or starting a business or whatever it might be. In those same situations, they're thinking different thoughts. Or getting critical feedback, for example, or failing. They're thinking different thoughts, which I think is really good news, because it means we just have to learn to think like them.
And that kind of leads me into my next question, because I was going to ask you about confidence. I feel like we see that a lot more with men. We see that they don't really apologize for things that they do, like you mentioned with the house. They take credit for achievements. They don't downplay their efforts. And I feel like women do this a lot. We're constantly, like, even if we do something well, it's like, well, I got a little lucky, or I had a lot of help. And it's like, no, take credit for what you did. So can you talk about that a little bit here? I mean, why do women do this, and how do we get to seem more confident?
Yeah, and I also want to say that there's a certain type of man who, takes credit and, projects this like extreme confidence. There's also men who do struggle. But I think for men, when you're a boy growing up, you have to learn how to act braver and tougher than you really feel for survival with other boys. So I think boys get a lot more practice, like, faking confidence and kind of winging it and figuring things out as they go along. And women, again, I'm generalizing because it's not in all cases, but, women feel like we need to know 150%. We don't want to start until we have everything all figured out. A number of years ago, I put together a program. I trained over 350 people from 19 countries how to be kind of outside the job box career coaches, how to work with people who wanted to figure out, how do I connect the dots between what I love to do and how I can make money doing it. So I was launching this big initiative where these coaches were going to be giving this free advice to all these people coming into these forums and so on. There was a lot of pieces to it. And they were saying, well, what do we do if this happens? And what if that happens? And I kept saying, well, I don't know. I've never done it. So I have no way of knowing, but we'll figure it out when it happens. And I mentioned that because so many of them said that was like the biggest takeaway for them, that you didn't have to know everything going in. And I think that's perhaps some of the confidence is that there's more of an understanding of that you can figure it out, that you're being hired or promoted based on your capacity, not on, your ability, this resume that says you've done it for 20 years and have 5 degrees in it.
Yeah, and it can be kind of scary, like, to do exactly what you said, to just, we'll wing it, we'll figure it out. Like, for a lot of people, that's terrifying, to not know the answers before you go into something.
Right, but there's certain things that you can't possibly know before you start. And if you want to know it all, like, good luck. It's the equivalent of trying to get to the end of the internet. There'll always be more to know. And that's why people like in tech, people in medicine are more susceptible to imposter feelings, because they're in rapidly changing information dense fields where no human could ever keep up. And yet we have this inner expectation that we should, and it's just simply not possible.
Everybody's human. So I feel like we all know people who overcompensate. And this is kind of how this topic actually got started here with us here at Red Shoes, as we were talking about this a little bit. Like, there's a fine line between faking it until you make it, and acting overly confident to the point that people kind of pick up on that and you kind of seem fake. Can you talk about that a little bit? What is that line? How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think men are more comfortable with like overly confident other men. Women are less comfortable with that. I think we have this like BS meter, and we have a lower tolerance level for that.
Yeah.
Than many men do at the same time. And it can actually be a turnoff, for women. And I think it's important for men to understand, because when I was in the corporate world, I remember we interviewed somebody and he was just so cocky. And he was being interviewed by 2 women. And we're like rolling our eyes, it's like he was not going to get the job, right? Because he was like overconfident, oversure of himself about stuff I don't think he even knew what he was talking about. But one time, I got to tell you the story. I was doing, it was probably about 300 people, University of Washington, all these PhD students, and people come up to the microphone, and I would have them do this process of looking at their imposter pattern. So several women got to the mic and they said, well, whenever I'm in a situation, I feel this and I think that, and I feel, incompetent, inferior, and insecure, self-doubt. Then this guy takes the mic and he says, well, when I feel like an imposter, I just remind myself that I'm a genius and everybody else is an idiot. And I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. Hear that every day. It was all I could do to say, I'm sorry, the egomaniac workshop is down the hall. And then it happened again, like a year or so later, some version of that, right? So I'm explaining this to this former professor of mine, Jerry Weinstein. He said, Valerie, it's the same thing. It's just that men, there's different ways that we cope with feeling like an imposter. And one way that some men cope is by projecting extreme confidence. Again, it goes back to growing up as a boy, and needing to kind of project that. But I think it can be a turnoff. And there are people, by the way, and it's been well documented, who have irrational self-confidence syndrome. People who think they know far more than they really do. That kind of proverbial smartest guy in the room.
Yep.
Who always has to one up everybody and knows more. And they kind of joke. There's a character like that. It was played by a woman on Saturday Night Live who always has to kind of one up, right? And mine's bigger and better, and and so on and so forth. And I think it's a turnoff. To me, fake it till you make it. And I hate the term. I wrote 2 chapters on that kind of general topic. I hate the term, but fundamentally, it's not about faking it. It is about not waiting until you feel 100% confident before you jump in and do something, and to be able to project confidence. I was on a call the other night with these very senior women in the NBA, National Basketball Association. And I'm not going to say which team, but she's the president of a team. And I watched an interview of hers, and beforehand I was like, wow, this woman is really confident. What a great role model. And I mentioned that on the call, you're an incredible role model. And she said, oh, I was really nervous and feels like an imposter. And I said, well, then good for you, because you didn't see that. I mean, if you look at Tina Fey, does she look like she's faking it?
No.
But she feels like an imposter. Tom Hanks feels like an imposter. I mean, you just kind of have to keep going regardless of how you feel.
So how can you exude that confidence then, especially when you're really scared? I mean, how do you do that? Because like you said, you're kind of just not faking it, but kind of to a degree. So how do you do that?
Well, I think a few things. One is to recognize that your body doesn't know the difference between fear and excitement.
Ooh, explain that one.
Well, if you get fear, excitement, you can still be sweaty palms, nervous stomach, dry throat, right? I mean, if you're standing at the top of a mountain getting ready to ski down, right, you can be incredibly excited and have those same butterflies, the same response than if you're terrified. So I think, like a lot of people are afraid of public speaking. It's the number one fear. Number 2 is death. So as Seinfeld says, what that means is you'd rather be in the casket than delivering the eulogy, which is kind of interesting to think about. But so whether it's going up to the podium or going in to ask for a promotion or, starting a business or a big meeting, whatever it is, you have to keep saying to yourself, I'm excited. I'm excited. You don't have to believe it. But would you rather say, I'm going to die, or I'm excited? And over time, you will start feeling more excited than scared.
Okay.
I mean, it's kind of amazing entertainers who have horrible stage fright, who actually have to kind of leave the stage, vomit, come back and continue performing. I was going to say breathing techniques, there's things we can do, just small. I'll just give you a few very physical small things. So if you're afraid of public speaking, small things you can do is project your voice.
Okay.
So often people come up to a microphone and they talk like this. Yes, I have a question I want to ask. One of my questions is, and they talk like you're across the dinner table when you're quite far, your audience, could be quite far away. So project your voice, and that will burn off nervous energy and also make you sound more confident and more interesting. Using gestures does the same thing. It releases some of the nervous energy, and it makes you more an engaging speaker. So there's a few just little things like that you can do.
Yeah, yeah, and that whole telling yourself you're excited, it almost sounds a little bit like like the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You keep telling yourself something, eventually things happen. You keep telling yourself you're excited, eventually you'll be excited.
Yeah, and to visualize, think about athletes. So
Mhm.
often they do a lot of visualization. They close their eyes, they imagine themselves jumping over the hurdle. So you could, imagine walking up to the podium or into the meeting and imagine yourself being calm and breathing and then there's just little tips I give people, like if you're kind of stuck and you don't know what to say, you could say, you've given me a lot to think about, because you need to buy time to come back and, get
Yeah.
your thoughts together.
Like a placeholder. So I do want to ask you, because right now is such an interesting time, especially for women. There's so many women dropping out of the workforce right now due to COVID-19, the stresses that it puts on families. I mean, the numbers are kind of staggering. I think it's something like 2 million women and counting across the US have left the workforce. Do you think we're going to see a rise in this imposter syndrome in women as they try to go back to work when this is over, because they might have been out or have to change careers, or, I mean, any multitude of situations?
Yeah, I mean, I can't see why it wouldn't. It makes sense because, whenever you're starting a new job, period, you're going to, those feelings are going to come up. And if you're changing careers, all the more so. I mean, I'm hoping people aren't going to be out that long. So, I think it's often hard when people take like a 5-year, gap and you're trying to get back in. But hopefully it won't be as bad. And one I guess, good news, but because so many people are working remotely, there's much more of that imposter feeling generally, because people who work alone are a group that's more susceptible, because you're not getting the same feedback. You're not having those little chats after a meeting in the hall with people and processing things. It's harder to recuse. You're wondering, is everybody else working? Maybe I should be working harder. So it's just kind of up generally. So they'll be in very good company.
So what are some of the benefits then, for if someone can overcome this and get to a place where you are? What are the things that they benefit from?
Oh my gosh. Well, you see, when you feel like an imposter, you have to find ways to manage it. People think of it as a feeling, but the reality is feelings lead to facts. I'm sorry, feelings lead to behaviors. And the reason I speak at, NASA and Google and Microsoft and Merck and McDonald's and these, Harvard and Oxford, is not because it's an interesting self-help topic. The reason they bring me in is there is an understanding that feelings lead to behaviors, and those behaviors have consequences, not just for individuals, but also for the organization. So, for example, when you feel like an imposter, Raquel, you have to find a way to do two things: to manage the anxiety of waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting to be found out, and to avoid being found out. So Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes talked about different common coping and protecting mechanisms, like flying under the radar, right? So one person might hold back. They don't grow their business. They don't go for more challenging opportunities or promotions. They don't speak up in meetings or classes or raise their hand. And on the other end of the continuum, overworking, over preparing for everything that they do. Not out of this, not out of the reality, the demands of the situation, because we all have to work hard, but out of the sense that I have to work harder because I'm not as intelligent as other people are, or capable as other people. Procrastination, never starting or finishing the book, the painting, the business plan, the degree, various forms of self-sabotage. And all of those things, they serve us. They protect us from humiliation or failure or challenge or difficulty. They help us avoid things and protect us from things, but always at a cost. There's a cost for all of those things. So you want to ask yourself, what will happen if I never change this pattern? What opportunities and experiences am I going to miss out on? What's the price? And then you can look at that from an organizational perspective. If you've got 20% of your people who are chronically procrastinating on important projects and tasks, that's a problem.
Yep.
If you've got bright, capable people who are flying under the radar, who aren't stepping up for new opportunities and assignments, you've got this drain in your talent pool. If you've got people overworking, over preparing, it's a waste of time on the over preparation side, but they could also be physically burning out. I mean, I knew a woman who was getting like 3 hours sleep. I mean, she was so accomplished, but she did it on like 3 hours sleep. She realized she was trying to outrun the no talent police, the imposter police, and she ended up getting a bleeding ulcer by the time she was 30.
Oh my gosh. Wow. It can affect you. It affects you at a health level, like physical health level.
Absolutely. And financially, there's a financial cost.
My goodness. So if the world could overcome imposter syndrome as a whole, what do you think could be achieved? I know this is kind of a big, lofty goal, lofty dream, but where do you think the world could go?
Oh my God. I mean, people will be starting amazing not-for-profits, and people will be, ramping up small businesses or growing their business, or there'll be more artists because people will be putting their work out there more. I just think we'd have more people at higher levels making, the more diverse folks you have at higher levels, the better decisions are being made. So sometimes I talk to organizations about kind of how do you create an imposter-free culture within an organization, and wouldn't it be amazing if we could do that in terms of the world? I mean, it makes no sense. I think it was 1978 that Clance and Imes first coined the term the imposter phenomenon. Why in 2021 is this still a surprise? Why are people just hearing about this? Why isn't it part of onboarding when people start their job?
That's a great point.
New student orientation, new employee orientation. Why isn't it in management training? Why aren't we, talking about it in schools and helping to, raise kids who are more resilient to failure and challenges and setbacks?
That is such a great point. I mean, if you brought it up at the forefront, you could just eliminate so much of that feeling of anxiety and imposter syndrome afterwards.
And I think we should, because, I always tell people this is not about you, that everybody loses when bright people play small.
Ooh, I like that term. That's cool.
Well, I first kind of got in touch with that, Raquel, when I was procrastinating horribly on writing my dissertation. I mean, at that time, I had the cleanest house in Northampton, Massachusetts, because I'd rather do anything than write this big thing. So my friend Rita wrote me a letter, pre-email. I wrote a letter, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, mailed it, and said, Valerie, you have to finish because you're learning things that could help a lot of people. And I remember thinking, oh my God, how selfish am I? Like, people are waiting for me. I have to hurry, and I found that tremendously motivating. It was a way for me to get out of my own way by focusing on, if I do this, how might it make a contribution or help someone else?
Yeah. Valerie, you've just helped a bunch of people here today being on the show and talking about this with me. I really appreciate you being here, sharing your insights. And if people want to learn more, if they want to even get in touch with you or maybe have you speak at a company function or just learn some things, how do they find you? How do they get a hold of you?
It's pretty easy. They just go to impostersyndrome.com.
It's easy to remember. You can't forget that one.
Nope.
Well, thank you so much for being here again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for listening. And if you want to hear more Soul Source, go ahead and subscribe to our show. We are available wherever you listen to podcasts. And there's one more thing. If you want us to talk about something, you want to learn more, you want us to cover something, head on over to our Facebook group. It's called the Soul Source Society. It's where we interact with our listeners. We share story ideas. We get ideas for future stories, talk about past shows, and just have a lot of fun overall. That's Soul Source Society on Facebook. We hope to see you there. And Soul Source is brought to you by a company called Red Shoes Inc. It's a leading agency specializing in crisis and strategic communications, media relations, social media, and so much more. To learn more about Soul Source and Red Shoes, visit us at redshoesinc.com.